Imagine for a second that your job is just flying the rich and famous around the world aboard private jets. Well, that's what my guest today on the Global Travel Channel podcast show does for a job. Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. My name is Mark Philpott. On the show, I talk to people from across the world about all things related to travel, from amazing adventures to inspiring stories, to the not so well-known destinations. We cover it all. You can find all of our previous podcast episodes on our Global Travel Channel website by going to www.globaltravelchannel.com. The Global Travel Channel is a collaboration between travel writers, photographers, YouTubers, podcasters, and vloggers from across the world. We bring you information that we hope makes your next travel experience an awesome one, no matter where you decide to travel to. You can also find the Global Travel Channel on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So be sure to head over there and subscribe, like, and follow us so that you can keep updated on our new content postings as and when they happen. You can even now support us through Patreon. So if you go to our Patreon page, for as little as the price of a cup of coffee per month, you can help us continue our show if you have fallen in love with our content. Now, I don't know about you, but the thought of being flown around the world on a private jet gets me quite excited, and I hope one day it's going to happen. But it's often reserved for the rich and famous, this form of transport. It's very efficient, and above all else, it's very private. So let's find out what it's like to fly these rich and famous people across the world by welcoming my guest today, Graham Railton. So Graham, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Thanks, Mark.
First time on a podcast show for you?
Very first time.
Well, I love having virgins on my show, so welcome. And what I thought I'd do is just do what I do with everybody else who's the first time on the show, is give them a random question, let you settle into the show a bit. And my random question for you today is, what's your favourite snack food when you're travelling?
All right, mate. Generally, I just like to have a bit of fruit.
Bit of fruit? You're a healthy guy.
Yeah, that's the way.
I usually get people saying chocolate bars and peanuts and all that sort of stuff, but you're a fruit man.
Yeah, mate. It's good for you.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, in my intro to the show today, I've told everybody that I'm going to be talking to a guy that flies the rich and famous around the world on private jets. So now, flying something that's pretty much in your blood, what inspired you to become a pilot?
My father used to fly gliders and instructed on them when I was just a young fella, and I spent many a day sitting in a dirt paddock while they ran the cable back and forth to the winch for the glider. Watching them be pulled up down at Bow Desert down there. So I suppose that's where it all started.
Now, we better tell everybody around the world that's listening today exactly where you're geographically located, because we didn't do that at the beginning. So where are you talking to us from today?
I'm down in Scarborough, which is on the Redcliffe Peninsula in Queensland in Australia.
Queensland, beautiful Australia. Fantastic. Now, you talked about Bow Desert. That's just south of the capital city in Queensland, Brisbane, isn't it?
Correct.
So as a young tacker, you were down there doing that. Did you get an opportunity at that age to go up in the gliders?
No, I didn't. That I would have been about 5 or 6 years old. So when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and probably not such a threat in a glider, my father put me in the front and took me for a bit of a fly, which was obviously something I'll never forget.
Now, having been in one myself, they're absolutely amazing, aren't they? It's just such a rush being in a glider.
Yeah, no, they're magic. It's pure form of flight.
What got your father into that? Did he have somebody that inspired him, or?
Not too sure, actually, to be quite honest. I think he just always had an interest in it.
Because gliders are not mainstream, are they? They're something that are fairly unique in terms of hobbies and that sort of stuff. So it would be interesting to know what got him into it. But you got inspired by your father, and one thing led to another, did it? What was kind of the thought process as you were going through school in regards to getting qualifications to become a pilot? Were you quite mindful of that, or?
No, not at all. When I was young, flying in general was something that I thought was out of reach. So I pushed it deep down and went on with life as it was, and and got married and had children quite young, and went out and did an apprenticeship as a carpenter, actually. And it wasn't until I was 27, 28, that one night I had an epiphany and thought, no, I need to change this. So I went out and started to fly part-time, and the rest is history, working my way through all the private, commercial, and airline transport pilot subjects part-time, and off I went from there.
Now, you made that sound all very easy to achieve that goal, but I'm sure it wasn't. So what was the first step in the process? Getting your PPL, was it? Private pilot's license?
Well, the first step back in those days was what was called a GFPT, which just allowed you to fly within a training area. And the training area I was in was just out of Redcliffe here, actually. So it sort of took in Deception Bay and over Bribey Island. And again, a beautiful part of the world to fly over. So GFPT first, then PPL, and stepped it up from there.
So how long did that first step take you, that one?
GFPT, I did 10 lessons pretty much back to back over a couple of months, and because I had 2 young daughters at that stage and a business and all the rest of the things that go with it, I figured it was out of reach from a money point of view, so I actually stopped for 12 months, and then every time an aircraft flew over, I would crank my head back and look up, and after 12 months, I decided no, I had to have a go at it, so I got into it part-time again and flew every week on a Sunday, and it took about another 3 or 4 months for PPL, then another 12 months for CPL, and then from there I went out instructing, and so the whole process from start to finish to ATPL was probably 3.5 to 4 years.
Okay. Now, for those that are not too familiar with the aviation industry, do you want to describe what some of those acronyms are that you've just been using?
Yeah, sorry, mate. Aviation's full of acronyms. So PPL is a private pilot's license. It pretty much in Australia allows you to fly anywhere in Australia, depending on what airspace you're trained to fly in. Mm-hmm. Then a CPL is a commercial pilot's license, which allows you to now go out and earn money, I suppose, is the short version. And then an ATPL is an airline transport pilot's license, which allows you to fly for the larger carriers on larger aircraft. And again, the tricky part with aviation is in amongst all those major licenses are many endorsements and ratings like undercarriage and jet and on it goes. So you're constantly training and upgrading and adding little pieces to the side of your license. But that's pretty much it.
Interesting. Now, I'm guessing that in terms of the whole experience of going through that process, there's lots of different little milestones along the way. Can you remember back to your first actual flight out of Redcliffe Airport and what that was like?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was in an aircraft called a Lightwing, which is a tail dragger, which are a challenging little aircraft at the best of times, and hopped in for my first flight as part of my GFPT and out of Redcliffe, and beautiful day, and we just went out over Bribey Island, and I was pretty much hooked. That was the end of it. So, and the next big milestone is your first solo, which is something that no pilot ever forgets.
So talk us through that, because I'm really fascinated to know what your experience was like with your first solo, and it must have been. Let's start off with the day before. Were you starting to rack up the nerves and going through all your notes and everything to remember what to do?
No, funnily enough, I don't remember being too nervous at all. Most instructors, or all instructors, I would say, are pretty good. They're not going to let you go unless they're confident you can do it. So I was fairly confident at the time. My first solo was actually at Arthurfield. It's a general aviation airport here in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And it's controlled by a tower. So we went out. I went out with my instructor, and we did a couple of circuits on the day. And he said, "Yep, this is it." And he notified the tower that I was going to be going for my first solo.
Yeah.
And we pulled off to the side of the runway and off onto the taxiway, and he hopped out and waved goodbye, and I gave the call to the tower and lined up, and off I went. It's simply one circuit,
Yeah.
So you just go basically around the airport.
Yeah.
And land, and when I landed, the tower came on and congratulated me, and I went back and picked up my instructor, and he congratulated me, and we taxied back and shut down. So that was pretty much it. But yeah, I still tingle now thinking about it. It's pretty special.
What was the most nerve-wracking part of it for you when you were actually doing the taking off and landing, or the circuit, or what?
No, after it was done. At the time, you're in automatic. You're not thinking about it too much. You're just going through the motions. So it's not till it's all over that you sit back and relive it. That probably start to, funnily enough, get nervous about it.
Yeah. Listen, I'm really thrilled to have you on the show today, because most of my listeners are people who sit at the back of the aircraft and don't know a lot about what's going on up the front. So it's great to get a perspective on the person that's sitting in perhaps the best office seat in the world, and having that beautiful view every day. I've been quite jealous of that when I've flown across the world, of the pilot sitting up the front enjoying the wonderful vista out the front window, rather than us looking out the side windows at the back.
Absolutely, definitely the best seat on the aircraft.
Yeah. Okay, so you got your you went solo, and what was the next step in the process for you after that?
Straight back into training again to do PPL, which involves a lot of cross-country navigation. Here in Australia, that's actually can be quite tricky. They send you out into parts of the country where there aren't very many known points, for want of a better term. It's called dead reckoning.
Mm-hmm.
So you fly around with a map on your lap and an instructor beside you, and he points you out to send you to a place that's literally a red roof in the middle of a paddock somewhere, and you have to find it and then navigate your way back. So that's an interesting part of your training.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get your PPL, then you start racking up your hours for your commercial, and the flying changes again. Yeah. They're lifting you to the next level where you can now safely carry passengers on board, and it's quite challenging. Particularly, for me, some of the airspace and some of the rules and regulations were certainly the hardest part of it. Going into some of that, Brisbane Airport was the major that we used to fly in and out of to do approaches and things. So yeah, challenging times, but certainly worth the effort.
So when you're going through your training to get your PPL, is there a lot of activity associated with looking over the aircraft before takeoff and making sure that everything's in order?
Absolutely. As the pilot, the PIC pilot in charge, you're the person who's responsible for every part of the flight, including the aircraft before and after. I had one engine failure out at Redcliffe and had to take the aircraft down into the swamp, and that was a good indication of a good pre-flight.
Wow! How far into your flying career were you when that happened?
I was an instructor at that stage, and I was doing a tailwheel endorsement for a gentleman who was building experience to get his commercial license. And we'd taken off at Redcliffe, and about 100 odd feet in the air, the aircraft started to splutter and carry on, and next thing the prop stopped and we had no runway left. So I had a decision to make. I took over. He did the best thing he could do, which is sit there quietly. And I could either put it in the bay or this swampy, grassy area. So I chose the swampy, grassy area, flew it down, and we got a little bit tangled up in the grass at the end. It flipped us over nice and clean.
Yeah.
We popped the belt, slid out, and walked back to the office.
Wow.
So,
extraordinary event. How was the old heartbeat at the end of that?
Again, it happened so quickly. There was nothing. There wasn't. I didn't even feel any adrenaline. It was just a case of getting on with it and getting it done. And it wasn't sort of until later that day, when all the dust had settled, the police and the fire brigade and everybody had come out, and we'd pulled the wreck back, and I was sitting in the office, that it actually sort of hit me a little bit. But again, no big deal. It's at that stage, at an instructor's level, that's sort of, I'd actually conducted that manoeuvre so many times in practice that it was just second nature.
So it's true what they say, your training just kicks in and you go on to kind of, to use a pun, autopilot mode and make it happen, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible actually. The human brain is an amazing thing, and if you put enough information into it and continue to, do the same thing over and over again, it really is. It's just second nature.
Yeah. And how was your mate sitting next to you? Did he have a heart attack, or was he okay at the end? Or?
No, he was excellent. Actually, he was probably the strongest link in the whole chain that day. If I had had somebody beside me who had panicked, it would have changed the outcome. Where he just sat there quietly, and the first words I heard from him after I took over the aircraft, we were hanging upside down, and I was shutting down the electrical, and he said, because we'd flipped over, the engine was in a little bit of salt water and it was starting to shock cool, so it was ticking. And he said to me, "It isn't going to explode, is it?" And I looked at him and said, "What are you doing here? Get out." So he popped his belt and slid down and hopped out, and I was pretty much right behind him. So,
Wow.
No, he was excellent.
So was there a possibility that it could have exploded?
No, I don't think so. It was in a Skyfox. The fuel tanks in the Skyfox were up in the wings, and we were laying on the wings.
Right.
And the engine was, sort of up and well away from the tanks. So, and there's not much in the way of electrical in a Skyfox. They're pretty basic aircraft, apart from radios and bits and pieces. So, no, I think we're fairly safe. You can never say never, but
yeah, wow. So, did you make the TV news? That's the most important question.
We did. We actually had a chopper come out. It was obviously a very slow news day. and we had the helicopter fly out and land at the end of the airport. And I'll always remember it. I'm standing there with the two police officers talking to them.
Yeah.
And they had pointed out that the media were there, which wasn't hard to comprehend because of all the noise with the chopper.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, look, I'm really not interested in talking to them." So they sort of slowed them up a little bit, and I noticed one female reporter there, literally in a lovely dress and everything, and I felt sorry for her, so I did grant her a quick interview.
You did the right thing, yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, that night we made the news, so it's all good. 15 minutes of fame.
Now, have you kept that folder so you can put it in your resume when you send it out for new jobs and say, "Look what I did"?
Yeah, I've actually still got the clipping. I made the second page, not the front page, but the second page of the Redcliffe Herald.
Right.
And still have it today.
Fantastic stuff. How was it after you went for your next flight? Like when you were about to take off on your next one after that, was there a bit of apprehension at all? Or?
No, not at all.
No,
it was pretty good. The next flight actually was 6 o'clock the next morning. It was a Saturday morning, and we did a flight. We used to do a flight with the students where they didn't have to pay for the instructor, and we would just do a flight outside the training area and go around over the back of Brisbane and up Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island, just to give them a feel what it's like to actually get outside the area in which they were training. And that was my first flight the next morning, and it was a lovely day, and off we went, and no harm, no foul.
Now, for those listening again around the world today, Graham's talking about a part of the world that's absolutely beautiful, and in particular for flying. What are some of your favourite parts about learning to fly around this part of the world, Graham?
Oh, well, as you know, Mark, the area is beautiful. To me, I've been all around the world, and there are many beautiful places, but there's Moreton Bay, and it is a very special part of the world. It really is. It's lovely.
I imagine also with the hinterland and the mountains and stuff, with the combination of that and the bay, and it must be really special there.
Oh, absolutely. When I used to instruct out of Redcliffe, I couldn't believe it. I had to pinch myself daily because you're actually being paid to do it. It was just amazing.
So what was the next natural progression for you in your career as a pilot from there? Where did you go to next?
Well, from there I had to, in aviation, it's all, in the early days anyway, it's all about building hours. You need time to fly larger aircraft, but to fly larger aircraft, you have to pay for it, or you have to go to places where they'll take pilots with slightly less time to work your way up. So I actually went out to Mount Isa. And I flew out there for a couple of years doing general charter for mines, and we also used to do a bit We had mail runs and things like that. So we would take the mail out to the stations and we'd actually have tourists on board, and they would come with us, and we'd go out. We had one mail run that went out into the territory. Took about 4 hours, and we had another one that went up through northern Queensland, and that was a day trip. So it was great. Again, some of the best flying I've ever done. The people in that part of the world are just very special. And again, just a beautiful part of the world, the Gulf. It's great. And from a young pilot's point of view, it was invaluable, the experience you build. Everything you do, every single aircraft you fly makes you that much better as you work your way up through the chain. So so Mount Isa for a couple of years, and across to Townsville, flying metros and things out of there, which is a slightly larger aircraft, the turboprop.
The flying pencils, I used to call them.
The Tube of Terror.
Yeah, the Tube of Terror.
Commonly known as. And from there down to Sydney with Eastern, which is now QantasLink on the Dash 8s.
Okay. So you've really had a very thorough exposure to the eastern seaboard of Australia as well as the interior.
Absolutely. Yes. Flew very much up and down the east coast of Australia for 4 or 5 years.
Have you got a preference over flying over the inland red centre or the coast? What's your favourite?
Oh, yeah, the coast is still my favourite. Boating is in my veins as well, so anything to do with the water's good.
Yeah, as long as it's not a plane in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
So all this time you were heading on a trajectory where you wanted to get into commercial aviation. Was that the goal at that time?
Yes, it was. To be able to make a living from your hobby is something not many people can do, and aviation, it's a funny thing for those who sort of make it to the end, or back in my time anyway, you had to be driven. If you weren't driven and you really didn't want to do it, you just didn't make it. Because a lot of the time, particularly in the early stages, you're earning very little to nothing, and you're doing it for love. So the thought of actually being able to earn a decent wage out of it is something that I think all young pilots with any sort of drive aim for.
Sounds like podcasting to me, mate.
Yeah. Similar characteristics.
Exactly, yeah. It's like most things in life, I guess. Those that are that passionate about it are going to make it through to the end. So you were sticking in there to get your wings to be able to fly people all over the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was always the dream.
Was there any moments during that journey where you did start to get a bit wavery and think, oh, this is too difficult, or was it pretty plain sailing for you?
No, it was never plain sailing. It was always hard work, but I wanted it, and it's that simple.
Now, I know a lot of people will be listening and be quite interested in the physical side of flying and what the regime is for you to keep yourself in a good shape to be a pilot. Can you talk to us about some of those aspects of it? Was there a very strong commitment to keeping yourself in a good physical condition, looking after yourself, all that sort of thing?
It is a very important part of aviation. At the moment, under my American license, every 6 months, once you're over 40, every 6 months you have to go in and do a medical. And it's one of the greatest fears of every pilot, that you're going to go in and your livelihood and everything you've worked for and strived to do is gone with a flick of a pen. So that's a pretty good motivator in helping you to keep focused on trying to maintain your health to the best of your ability. Now, on top of that, of course, it's very important. The pilot has to be healthy, and fortunately, commercial aircraft these days, a large majority of them are 2 pilots, so you do have another one there, but the complexities of the aircraft these days, you pretty much need the 2 pilots to get it to the ground as well. So, yeah, health is everything. I can understand why it was so regimented in relation to the medicals, and every pilot, certainly in the back of their mind, is aware and understands that they have to look after themselves. It's that simple.
Now, for those that watch a lot of the air crash investigation shows on television and are aware of some of the tragedies that have happened around the world, the the whole element of mental health comes into the game as well. Is that something that's a big thing in the aviation industry as part of that medical, is the mental health side of things?
Your general medical, no, but in saying that, it certainly has become more and more important, certainly from a company point of view, over the last probably 10 years in particular. There was that one case with the first officer, I think it was a 320, who decided he was going to end it all and take all with him. That highlighted the mental health side of it, certainly.
Is it something that's talked about amongst pilots? Is it out there, or is it just something that's very much under the mat still?
No, it's certainly it's acknowledged, and like I said, it's more at a company level these days. Nothing that's regimented as such, but
it's quite fascinating because when you think about it, we as passengers sitting at the back of the aircraft put a lot of, I guess, credit into the people sitting up the front, and you don't take too much time to think about it when you board an aircraft, because you're generally on your way to some happiness place that's going to make you feel good for a while, and there's not a lot of thought that puts into the process of who's going to get you there, and the fact that you're flying at 38,000 feet and going at nearly 1,000 kilometers an hour, and it's almost like a trajectory to a coffin if things go wrong. So it's a very interesting aspect, I think, of the whole industry, is that so many people around the world every day put so much faith in that just a small number are sitting in the front of the plane.
Oh, absolutely. And these days, well, aviation in general, it's such a common norm these days that people don't think about it, and that's actually a good thing from the point of view that, people shouldn't have to be concerned about that sort of thing. For them, it should be as simple as as you said, they're off to enjoy their holiday with their family and friends, and the last thing you want to do is sit there and start to wonder about who's actually sitting up the front of the aircraft. And the fact that the general public don't think about that is actually a good indication of the industry itself. Again, unfortunately, you can never say never. There's always the exception to the rule, but 99.9% of the time, that the level of the individuals who are up front are such that they're aware of it. They're aware of the responsibilities and take it very seriously.
Do you think the psychology has changed over the years, that people now think, okay, we're probably safer than ever because of the technology advancements and trainings and all that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Again, you can do anything with statistics, but the old rule of thumb has been for many years that I think you're 4 times more likely to be injured in a vehicle than you are in an aircraft. The level of training and the level of maintenance and everything else that goes into aviation these days is astounding. It really is. And with the invent of the increase in the technology itself is it's all about safety. Everything's driven about safety.
So, getting back to your commercial career, what was your first commercial job as a pilot?
Well, the first commercial job was in the instructing out at Redcliffe.
Okay.
That's a commercial operation because people are paying. So, yeah.
And what about flying passengers? As far as in the airline industry, you said you worked for Qantas, was it?
Yeah, I worked for. It was known as Eastern Airlines then, which has now become Qantas Link. Out of Sydney. Did that for about 12 months or so, and then moved to their sister company, Sunstate, which is now also Qantas Link, out of Brisbane.
Yep.
And used to fly up and down the east coast on the Dash 8s.
Yeah. So how much interaction do you have, or any, with customers when you're in that kind of role? Is it something that you're very segregated from and you don't have any interaction at all, or do you actually get to speak to people about where you're going, how's your holiday, what blah blah blah?
No, very little. After September 11th, aviation changed immensely, and it was about that stage when I was Eastern and Sunstate, and they were actually installing, forget the terminology, basically a more secure door to the cockpit.
Yeah.
And we actually had procedures put in place for lockdown and what we as the pilots would do if there was a terrorist on board and these sorts of things. So unfortunately it took away that interaction. Many years ago, you could bring people up into what was called the jump seat, which is a seat that comes out between the pilots, slightly behind them, of course. And, you could interact that way. But after September 11th, that all those privileges to the general flying public were gone. So you pretty much isolated that the main interaction is actually through the flight attendants.
Yeah. I remember as a young tacker, I had an opportunity to do a couple of jump seats, and I tell you what, it was something that really changed your life as far as having that perspective. You felt like the king of the world sitting up there with the two pilots, and just having that view. It was an experience that you'd never ever forget. It's a shame that it's no longer possible.
It is a shame. It's a great shame indeed. But yes, that's the world we live in.
You went down the path of flying people for Sunstate and Eastern Link. Then you decided to change path again. So what happened next?
I actually had a job offer in Hong Kong for a company up there. They were flying 737s. And again, it was passenger carrying from Hong Kong into mainland China. At the same time, I had an offer from another company on corporate aircraft. And at that stage, corporate aircraft, as in flying private jets, there weren't that many in Australia, and I didn't know much about it. So I went up to Hong Kong and did an interview with this corporate company, and they offered me the job. And as it turned out, I actually had exactly the same start date with the airline in Hong Kong as I did with this corporate company. Money was very similar, and I decided to go with a corporate company, logic being that I could either drive a bus into China every day or I could drive a limo around the world. So I took the limo job and have been very, very happy ever since. So it's very different. Corporate aviation is very different to airline.
So let's talk about that, because I know a lot of people listening today will be enthralled to hear what actually goes on behind the scenes with this type of flying. It's very different to what most of us have ever experienced. So what was your first experiences going from the cattle class freighters to the corporate executive world? Was there a significant difference from a pilot perspective?
Flying-wise, no. So when you're actually at the controls, it's pretty much same old, but the biggest difference I found is for a start, you have a very small crew. So there's generally only two pilots, a captain, a first officer, or two captains, and one flight attendant. So the bond between the crew becomes greater, and you're responsible for far more than just flying the aircraft as a pilot. You're literally, as a captain in particular, you're responsible for pretty much the whole operation. You have support staff, of course, you have your engineers and you have your flight ops and people like that who are extremely important. But when you're on the road, when you're away, because, again, these aircraft go everywhere in the world. There isn't anywhere they don't go. And when you're going into some of these countries, particularly in Africa and South America and places like that, the crew are everything to everybody. So everything from flying the aircraft safely, getting it in, making sure the customs, immigration, and quarantine are all sorted out for the passenger, the catering, all the way through to making sure that the lavatory is serviced, and unloading the bags and everything in between. So that was the biggest difference for me, is that you as that team of three, you are everything to everybody, and the large majority of the time you're flying the person who can end your career in a matter of minutes. So it's a little bit different to flying airlines, where you're not interacting with the passengers. When you're corporate, you're interacting very, very much with the passengers.
Yeah. So tell us about that without naming names. Tell us about the types of people that you started carrying on these flights, and what kind of aircraft were you flying or are flying?
And initially, the first type of aircraft I was on when I went to Hong Kong, I was a first officer, was a Gulfstream G200. So they're sort of a mid-range. They've got about a 5.5 hour range, and were quite popular out of Hong Kong at that stage, going into mainland China and Southeast Asia in general. And they're a lovely little aircraft, and that operation was, operating under what's called an AOC. So it was basically charter. It wasn't owned by one owner. It was chartered to millionaires and billionaires and people like that. So in that 2 years I was on that aircraft, we flew everybody. You fly everyone from heads of state to, billionaires, businessmen, golf players, you name it, everybody, all high net worth individuals, of course.
Yep.
So, and that was a great job. From there, then I moved over into an aircraft that was privately owned, and the operation changes again completely because you're working directly for the owner of the aircraft, and depending on the owner will depend on what the operation's like, because the owner that I was working for literally was global. He travelled the whole world. One of the main reasons that he purchased the aircraft initially is that a lot of his business was in Africa and South America and places like that, and he was concerned about the level of safety of some of the local carriers. So by having his own aircraft, he could pick and choose his crew and know the level of training and the standard of maintenance on the aircraft and things like that. And we did. There aren't too many places we didn't take him. It was incredible.
Now, I must say at this stage, I share that gentleman's same philosophy about concerns over safety in some of those places, but I haven't yet got the Gulfstream sitting in the garage, so got to work on that one, I guess.
Yeah, yes, it would be nice.
Is it a tough gig to get as a pilot? You obviously spent many years working your way up into this, but once you're in the corporate world, is it easy to get different gigs?
Yeah, it has been. It's slowed quite a bit up in Asia now for obvious reasons. China's slowed a little, and the various things that are going on politically around the world. So it's a supply, very much like most industries. It's supply and demand. These days, it's probably more of who you know. There's still, of course, you still have to have the qualifications and the experience to get the seat, but it certainly helps to be in the industry and know people in it and work your way up from there. Now, 15 years ago, different story.
Now, I'm guessing a lot of these places you go to, the corporate jets actually go into sometimes a different airfield than what most of us fly into. Is that right?
Correct. And again, it depends on the country. Most of the airports in Asia, for instance, you tend to use the majors. However, the US is a very good example. There's an airfield every 50 feet. So, apart from, say, clearing customs, immigration and quarantine initially, then you're pretty much able to go anywhere in the US into secondary or tertiary airports. So, again, something that these aircraft allow you to do simply because of their smaller jet, of course, and they just gives you more access to areas.
Now, for someone, I've had the privilege of being able to fly around the world as a business guy for a number of years and have been to most of the major airports. And I look at a place like Changi Airport in Singapore as being the most efficient place I've probably ever flown through as a passenger. How does the corporate side of it compare when it comes to, wheels down, I'm on the ground as a passenger on board a Singapore Airlines flight, I'm out of the terminal within 15 minutes with my luggage. How does that compare to a corporate guy landing in Singapore? And I know they don't land at Changi, they go to another airport, but what's the comparison in terms of the processing time for a corporate passenger?
Again, it depends very much on the country. Some countries are geared for corporate, where they land, walk off, hop straight in their car, and they're done, they're gone within minutes. Other parts of the world, they're very much like anybody else coming off an airline. So, and again, this is a big part of it with the operational side and the crew. It's up to the crew to impart on the owner of the aircraft what they're going to expect when they go to these places. when they're going there the first time, because their expectations tend to be fairly high, and they'll become a little annoyed if they turn up in an airport and are delayed. So again, research before we go. You'll go and talk to the owner and explain it to them, and you go from there. But yeah, again, it's country by country.
It's sounding to me as though the corporate gig is a lot more intense and hard-working than the other commercial freighter cattle class stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that depends on who you talk to, I suppose. Being a corporate guy, I'd say yes. If you speak to some of the airline guys, they'll probably give you an argument on it.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, with having done both, corporate is more challenging because simply because of the responsibilities that you have on you as a crew. Those responsibilities aren't there. A good example is you're sitting on the ground somewhere, the boss is on board, he has a meeting at X, Y, Z on the other side of the world. You go to start the aircraft and she doesn't start. So you've become what's called AOG, aircraft on ground. In an airline, yes, there's PAs made to the passengers and all the rest of it, but they never even see the pilot most of the time. When you're dealing with a high net worth individual and you're the one that has to peel out of your seat and go back and tell him why he's going to miss a meeting that's could cost his company billions of dollars, it's interesting.
Don't you send the guy sitting next to you back to do that?
Yeah, well, tried that, didn't work. So.
Fair enough. Now, you talk about the relationship with the corporate client, and you talked about how much more, I guess, closer it is as a result of it. A, small aircraft, B, they typically own it or they're chartering the aircraft. Does it get to a level where you're being invited to extraordinary parties around the world and dinners and all that sort of stuff? Do they get that close to you?
Again, it depends very much on the owner. I've had the privilege over the years to be invited out to a few different functions and things like that with the owners, and it's always lovely. But me personally, I'm an employee. I'm there to do my job and do it professionally. So I try and steer clear of it, but very much driven by the owner. Some owners, I've heard stories where some owners do that frequently, and the crews are accepted as sort of part of the family, and that's lovely. But yeah, it's a fine line between pleasure and pain. Familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of looking at it. What's your favourite corporate jet to be flying, and why would you choose that particular one?
Well, again, I'm biased. I'm predominantly Gulfstream, so majority of the Gulfstreams I've flown are 450s, 550s and 650s, and even though the 650s have always been the head of the pack, so to speak, it goes the furthest and the fastest. My personal preference is a 450. And that's because it's a bit more of a pilot's aircraft. I just enjoy flying it. It's a lovely aircraft. But again, nothing wrong with a 550 or 650. Lovely aircraft. Right. So any of the Gulfstreams are very good.
Well, I'm sure all the Gulfstream executives that are listening to the show will be happy with your answer anyway. So that's.
I might get a free shirt out of it.
I'm hoping to get a free ride out of it. Obviously, safety is a huge thing in the aviation industry. How's that changed over the years since you've been flying?
It's certainly been highlighted a lot more. That the regulators are certainly more aware these days. The importance of CRM, crew resource management, and things like that. So it's the main changes, I suppose, are in the regulators themselves. They've highlighted it, and they're bringing a lot of the operators to the table, so to speak, which is good. It's what is needed. And again, aviation's very safe. You know, it is. It's astounding, actually, that the number of movements and the number of people that are carried worldwide every day. And you look at the statistics again. You can do what you want with statistics, but the general rule of thumb is it's just unbelievably safe. It really is, and that's due to, you know, people being aware of the importance of what they're doing and how they do it, and it's constantly evolving. It's getting better and better all the time.
I told a couple of people that I was going to have you on the show today, and of course they gave me this question to ask you. They said, you've got to ask him about what his thoughts are around MH370 and what happened to that aircraft and where is it and all the rest of it. So this is the first chance I've had on this show to talk to a pilot about his theory on what happened to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370.
I do not know is the short answer. It is one of the strangest things I've heard of. The fact that a 777 can go missing in this day and age with the amount of technology that's not on the aircraft but is buzzing around the earth. I personally think, and I'm not into conspiracy theories, but I personally think somebody somewhere knows what happened. I could only guess, but where it is, again, I could only guess. If I had to guess, I'd say the Indian Ocean. With the information that was given to the general public. But yeah, very, very strange, very, very sad.
So when it happened, did the pilot community start, talking about all the different variations of this? Was it something that was a hot topic?
Oh, I think it was a hot topic globally. I remember going, and I was actually doing my will at the time. I'd gone down to see my solicitor and was updating my will, and he asked me what I thought on it. So, and the family, many people asked what I thought it was, and again, we'll never know. So yes, within aviation, absolutely. Again, the technology that's on these aircraft these days is just amazing. We're tracked everywhere we go. They know where you are within 20 feet. So yes.
So when you say we'll never know, do you really believe that? Do you think we'll never find the answer of what happened to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370?
Who knows, mate? I don't. The fact that it's gone as long as it has without the information being brought forward would have to indicate that there's something untoward more than just the norm, I guess. So maybe we will never know.
Let me ask it another way then. Can you ever imagine that, and God forbid, that your Gulfstream vanished one day out of the sky, that you'd never be found? Like, can you imagine that would be the case?
No.
Let's move on. How's the dream going to continue to evolve for you? Are you going to be in the corporate flying community for much longer? Do you have any other plans, or is this something that you're really happy with and settled on?
I'll probably go sailing, actually.
There you go. That's what happens, isn't it? Most pilots end up on a boat somewhere.
Exactly. Early retirement and go sailing.
Fantastic. Is that a short-term dream, or?
No. It's been around for a while.
Okay.
So,
but you've got a lot of years of flying ahead of you still.
Oh, well, you never say never.
Yeah, right. Before we start to wrap up today, I've got to ask you some of these types of questions. What's some of your favourite airports to fly to? Like, from a pilot point of view, and I know that pilots get quite excited sometimes by a particular landing or takeoff procedure in a certain place. Have you got some of your favourites?
Oh, I always used to enjoy flying in the US. It was great that the American air traffic controllers are something special, and the way they stack them and rack them over there is amazing. So, San Francisco, LAX, going into, there's a small airport in New York called Teterboro. They all had their challenges, and like I said, it's quite amazing just how people that are highly trained with all the right equipment can get it done, and they get it done day in and day out. So those major airports in the US are the ones that stick with me.
So talking about Teterboro and that part of the world, it brings up another phenomenal airline experience, and that was the landing on the Hudson River by Captain Sully. How was your recollection of that and what that pilot actually achieved that day?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, good on him. That's something special. Again, that's years and years of experience coming down to one moment. Good on him.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. Have you seen the movie?
I have.
You have?
I have, yeah.
And is it as far away from the reality within the airline world as we can imagine, or are there some pretty close elements there?
Oh, no, I think the movie's fairly close. Only Sully and his FO would be able to tell you how true it was, but no, it seemed to stick fairly close to what you would expect.
Yeah. Now, another thing I wanted to ask you today about was equality when it comes to flying and pilots, and we're seeing the emergence and a great thing of more and more ladies flying planes. Is that also happening in the corporate sector?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The last company I worked for, actually down out of Sydney, there, the chief pilot was female, and the first officer was female. So I was the only male on board. So yeah, more and more, good on them.
Has it changed the industry in any particular way? The blokes had to clean up their act a bit, or you know what I mean in regards to that? Is it something that's changed the behaviour, even the radio chatter and all that sort of stuff?
No, I don't think so. The radios, it's very regimented. You know, there's a certain terminology that we have to use, and it's very closely followed. The industry itself, I don't know that it's really changed that much. Certainly in the time I've been in it, females have always been a large part of it, very important part of it. Normally in the past being flight attendants, and now they're just simply moving to a different part of the aircraft, up front. So no, I don't think the industry's really changed that much.
What's one of the funniest things that's happened when you've been in your corporate gig? Something that's happened on the flight, or just with something that happened between point A and point B on that particular trip?
Oh goodness, I can't think now. There's always something to keep you entertained. Generally on the radio, you'll hear something that's interesting. Particularly in the US, they tend to be a little bit more colloquial with their radio calls, and you hear some interesting chatter sometimes.
Yeah, I bet. Before we wrap up, this is a travel show, and you're the first opportunity I've had to get a pilot for coming on the show, so thanks for that. But I just wanted to wrap up by asking you about travel and how it's changed your life, and in a unique position that you're in and how you see the world. How would you kind of summarize the impact that traveling around the world as a pilot's had on your life?
Oh, well, it's life-changing. And again, it's a bit cliche, you hear it said, but it's very true. To be able to experience how other people live, it changes your whole outlook on your life. It just does. And it's great. You know, I think it makes you gives you a little bit more tolerance and just general understanding.
Is Australia going to be your base camp, so to speak, for a while, or are there other parts of the world that have you calling for your particular profession at the moment?
Well, for now, I'm just messing around with the boat. So where is next is it's in the lap of the gods.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap up now and let you get back to your boat, because I know that you've got plenty of work to do there. Graham, it's been a hoot having you on the show. Thanks very much for accepting my invitation. I'm sure that every listener around the world's been gravitating towards this and in awe of the job that you do, and giving us a great insight to the world of aviation through the eyes of a pilot. So that's fantastic. Thanks very much.
No, great. Thanks, Mark.
There we are. A great insight from Graham about flying around the world as an aviation pilot for corporate and commercial clients. Fantastic stuff. Hope you all enjoyed that one. If you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel podcast show, head on over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You can find all of our previous episodes listed there. If you'd like to download them, go to Apple iTunes under podcast and you'll find them there. Also on Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and a host of other platforms that you can all find listed on our website. Okay, that's it for this particular episode. I hope you loved enjoying listening to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. My name is Mark Philpott. Until next time, I wish you all bon voyage.